All right, G. We were talking about strategic group map of the video game industry. And I was telling you that we have to take two axis values. And those two axis values can be qualitative and quantitative. Those two axis values are the values which can give us, which can provide us the basis for differentiating different firms from one another. For example, in our example, we have on the slide, we have taken types of video games, suppliers and distribution channels, which can be arcades, home PCs, video game consoles, online internet games. And on the x-axis, we have taken overall cost to players of video games, which can be low, medium, and high. And based upon these two factors, we have categorized the video games on this matrix, on this area, plot area. And different companies are placed based upon the values on the axis in this plot area. And the circles we are seeing are representing the contribution of the firms in that particular space in comparison to their sales with the industry's total sales, right? For example, the greater the circle the firms would be having would represent that their contribution in the total industry sales would be more. So remember that size of the circle is independent of number of companies, but is dependent upon the respective sales. As we have just seen the demonstration of, strategic group map, let me discuss with you the steps again so that you become familiar with how and why we are designing this matrix. The step one was identify competitive characteristics, as we have seen on the x-axis and y-axis, that differentiate firms in an industry from one another. The step two, plot firms on a two-variable map using pairs of these differentiating characteristics. Step three, assign firms that fall in about the same strategic space to same strategic group. And step four, draw circles around each group, making circles proportional to size of group's respective share of total industry sales. And these four steps were demonstrated in this particular example. The strategic group map, which we design in strategic management, is just like the perceptual map which you develop in the courses of marketing. We'll be discussing the perceptual group mapping as well in next coming slides. There are certain guidelines for strategic group maps. The first guideline you need to focus upon is talking about variables. And it is said that the variables selected as axes should not be highly correlated. Number two, variables chosen as axes should expose big differences in how rivals compete. The step three is the variables do not have to be either quantitative or continuous. The step four is drawing sizes of circles proportional to combined sales of firms in each strategic group allows map to reflect relative sizes of each strategic group. And last guideline on the slide is if more than two good competitive variables can be used, several maps can be drawn. And generally speaking, at least 3 to 4 maps are suggested to clarify the concept of strategic group map and to find out that what are the bases upon which the companies are competing with one another and who are the direct stakeholders and who are the indirect stakeholders. Now, there are certain interpretations of the strategic group maps. The first interpretation we have is that driving forces and competitive pressures often favor some strategic groups and hurt others. The second interpretation is that profit potential of different strategic groups varies due to strengths and weaknesses in each group's market position. And the third strategic group map interpretation is the closer the strategic groups are on map, the stronger the competitive rivalry among member firms tends to be. So these are very important interpretations of strategic group map. I discussed these again with you. The first one, that driving forces and competitive pressures often favor some strategic groups and hurt others. That means that the firms in one circle would have the same type of strategic forces, driving forces, same type of competitive pressures as compared to the other circles. Second, the profit potential of different strategic groups varies due to strengths and weaknesses in each group's market position, as their market positioning would be different. And the closer strategic groups are on map, the stronger the competitive rivalry among member firms tends to be. Now, as I told you that there is another related discussion in marketing, which is perceptual maps. And the concept behind perceptual maps is just like the concept behind the strategic group mapping, which we have discussed in the strategic management discussion. As you could see, the product differentiation minimizes competitive rivalry. And for that matter, we have developed a perceptual map of automobile brands. And in that case, it is said that perceptual maps are a visual display, usually on 2 dimensions. And we have discussed that strategic group mapping is also on 2 dimensions of how brands are perceived by customers. And over there, we discussed that how the companies are differentiated from one another. The closer the brands are positioned in this space, the more competitive they are to each other. And we have just discussed in the strategic group map case that more closer the groups are, more the competition would be among them. The third point on perceptual discussion is that perceptual maps identify open spaces or unmet customer needs, and perceptual maps identify salient attributes of the products on which consumers differentiate brands. So as different brands are closer to one another, they would be having the similar characteristics, just like in strategic group mapping. The closer the groups are, the closer the companies are on the strategic map, they would be having the similar characteristics. So there can be many examples of perceptual maps and the strategic group maps, as this is the perceptual map of garment brands. This was based upon price and style, as we take 2 axis values. This was about demographic and style. So again, we are taking 2 axis values. And by the way, you can use the same axis values in strategic group map as well. That you can develop perceptual maps and strategic group maps with the similar axis values. Now, that was question number 4, which Thompson and Strickland talked about when they were crafting the strategy. And now we are going to talk about question number 5. And the question number 5 is about strategic moves. What strategic moves are rivals likely to make next? So to develop this discussion, a firm's own best strategic moves are affected by, number 1, current strategies of competitors, and number 2, future actions of competitors. And for that, we need to develop competitive intelligence. It is said that we have to profile key rivals, and then we have to involve gathering competitive intelligence about their current strategies, most recent moves, resource strengths and weaknesses, and announced plans. So these are the concerns which we need to collect through our survey of the industry and through the tools which we would be learning in the next coming slides about creating competitive intelligence. Now, when you are there to start your competitor analysis, remember that successful strategists take great pains in scouting competitors to, number 1, to understand their strategies, number 2, to watch their actions, number 3, to evaluate their vulnerability to driving forces and competitive pressures, Number 4, size up their resource strengths and weaknesses and their capabilities. And next is try to anticipate rivals' next moves. Now, looking at a generic table, which is talking about characterizing objectives and strategies of competitors, we can have different context in which the competitors can develop based upon their competitive scope, strategic intent, market share objective, competitive position, strategic posture, and competitive strategy. For example, if our competitive scope varies from local, regional, national, multi-country, and global perspective, we can discuss that based upon their competitive scope, what can be the strategic intent, market share objective, competitive position, strategic posture, and competitive strategy. For example, starting from the left column, if competitive scope of the firm is local, their strategic intent in the industry, the overall, would be to become dominant leader. And their market share objective would be aggressive expansion via acquisition and internal growth. And their competitive position would be getting stronger on the move. And their strategic posture can be mostly offensive. And their competitive strategy would be striving for low-cost leadership. So this is a generic expression in which we have seen that if the competitive scope is local, what could be the strategic intent, market share objective, competitive position, strategic posture, and strategic competitive situation. But if the competitive scope is global, the strategic intent can be move up a notch in ranking. The market share objective can be, in case of global, hold on to present share. The competitive position in terms of global can be struggling, losing ground. And strategic posture in terms of global would be conservative followers. And competitive strategy in terms of global can be pursuing differentiation based on quality, service, technology, superiority, breadth of product line, image and reputation, more value for the money, and other attributes. Okay, so through this table, we can at least drive an idea that what can be the strategic aspects related to the competitive scope we are exposed to. Now, moving towards predicting moves of rivals. Remember that predicting rivals' next moves involves, number 1, analyzing their current competitive positions, examining public pronouncements about what it will take to be successful in industry. It can either be through grapevine, and it says that gathering information from grapevine about current activities and potential changes. Another way through which we can predict the moves of rivals can be studying past actions and leadership, and then determining who has flexibility to make major strategic changes and who is locked into pursuing same basic strategy. So these are the ways through which we can predict the rivals' next moves. Now, moving towards the 6th question, which Thompson and Strickland has sorted out to develop a strategy. And the 6th question is talking about what are the key factors for competitive success. And these are the same factors which we sorted out in competitive profile matrix, which was discussed by Freda David. And in competitive profile matrix, we developed critical success factors in the left column. And the rationality behind those critical success factors is the same, which we are going to talk about in question number 6 of Strategy Formulation Framework 3 developed by Thompson and Strickland. So competitive elements most affecting every industry member's ability to prosper, and that would include specific strategy elements, product attributes, resources, competencies, competitive capabilities. And KSFs spell the difference between profit and loss and competitive success or failure. Now, how to identify industry key success factors? It says that answers to 3 questions pinpoint KSFs, key success factors or critical success factors. And those 3 questions are, number 1, on what basis do customers choose between competing brands of sellers? The second question is, what resources and competitive capabilities does a seller need to have to be competitively successful? And the third question would be, what does it take for sellers to achieve a sustainable competitive advantage? So these are the 3 questions which would sort out for us the list of key success factors. Now remember that key success factors consist of 3 to 5 really major determinants of financial and competitive success in an industry. Again, looking at the generic list of common types of key success factors, I have sorted out some of the key success factors for you, and you have to carefully develop the key success factors for your own industry through investigating the 3 questions we have just talked on the previous slide. When we discuss technology related key success factors, that may include scientific research expertise, product innovation capability, expertise in green technology, given technology, capability to use internet to conduct various business activities. When we talk about manufacturing related key success factors, low cost production efficiency, quality of manufacture, high use of fixed assets, low cost plant locations, high labor productivity. These can be the examples of manufacturing related key success factors. When we talk about distribution related key success factors, strong network of wholesale distributors, gaining ample space on retailer shelves, and likewise, when we talk about marketing related key success factors, fast, accurate technical assistance, courteous customer service, accurate filling of orders, these can be the marketing related key success factors. When we talk about skills related key success factors, superior workforce talent, quality control know-how, design expertise, expertise in particular technology, and so on. And when we talk about organizational capability, superior information systems, ability to respond quickly to shifting market conditions, and other types might include favorable image, reputation with buyers, overall low cost, convenient locations, pleasant, courteous employees, access to financial capital, and patent protection. These can be the key success factors. After investigating the 6 questions in quest of developing the strategy, the 7th question is going to conclude the 6 questions. And the 7th question would be talking about industry attractiveness. And it would be said that is the industry attractive or unattractive, and why? The objective behind this discussion would be that to develop conclusions about whether the industry and competitive environment is attractive or unattractive, both near or long term, for earning good profits. So that is the main objective behind this question number 7. And the major principle which we have to follow when developing this question number 7 is that a firm uniquely well suited in an otherwise unattractive industry can, under certain circumstances, still earn unusually good profits. Okay, so that is very interesting and important to witness, that sometimes the firm which is in declining industry is still earning handsome profits. And why so? Because that firm would be uniquely well suited, and that uniqueness can also be brought in by sustainability factors which were rare, valuable, costly to imitate, organized, robustness. So these were the factors which were there to provide the sustainability to the firms. And the firms which have achieved their sustainability are the firms which can still earn good profits even if the industry is declining. Now, things to consider in assessing industry attractiveness are, number one, industry's market size and growth potential, whether competition conditions are conducive to rising and falling industry profitability, will competitive forces become stronger or weaker, whether industry will be favorably or unfavorably impacted by driving forces, potential for entry exit of major firms, stability, dependability of demand, severity of problems facing industry, degree of risk and uncertainty in industry's future. These are the things which are there to sort out the industry attractiveness. Now, when you have to conduct an industry and competitive situation analysis, two things must be kept in mind. Number one, evaluating industry and competitive conditions cannot be reduced to a formula-like exercise. And we have to remember that thoughtfully, and we have to remember that thoughtful analysis is essential. Number two, sweeping industry and competitive analysis need to be done every 1 to 3 years. So we have to repeat the whole exercise every 1 to 3 years. Now, these were the 3 strategy formulation frameworks. The first one was given by Freda David, in which we developed different matrices. The second one was given by Johnson and Scholes, in which we talked about 3 filters: suitability, feasibility, and acceptability. And the third one is given by Thompson and Strickland, in which we have investigated 7 questions to find out and reach to our final conclusion that which particular strategy would be suitable for us. Now, once the strategy is finalized, we also need to see that what are the political issues associated with strategic choice. The topic we are going to talk about now is the politics of strategy choice. And it is said that the political maneuvering consumes valuable time. Political maneuverings consume valuable time, subverts organizational objectives, diverts human energy, and results in the loss of some valuable employees. Remember that political biases and personal preferences get unduly embedded in strategy choice decisions. When we talk about politics of strategy choice, the hierarchy of command in an organization combined with career aspirations of different people and the need to allocate scarce resources guarantees the formation of coalitions of individuals who strive to take care of themselves first and the organization second, third, or fourth. Now, that is a very important concept we need to focus upon, that the hierarchy of command plays the major role in crafting and finalizing the strategy. Now, there are different tactics, the political tactics, which aid to strategists. And those tactics are equifinality, satisfying, generalization, focus on higher order issues, and provide political access on important issues. Let me discuss these terms and these tactics adapted by the strategists politically one by one. The political tactics for strategists, the first one is equifinality, which means that it is often possible to achieve similar results using different means or paths. The satisfying would mean achieving satisfactory results with an acceptable strategy is far better than failing to achieve optimal results with an unpopular strategy. The third strategic option is generalization, which means shifting focus from specific issues to more general ones may increase strategists' opinion or option for gaining organizational commitment. The next very interesting tactic adopted by strategists would be focus on higher order issues only. And that would mean by raising an issue to a higher level, many short-term interests can be postponed in favor of long-term interests. And when we talk about tactics, another option available to strategists would be provide political access on important issues, which would mean strategy and policy decisions may significantly provide negative consequences for middle managers and will motivate intervention behavior from them. So these are the political tactics adopted by strategists for their own benefit and for their own survival in the organization. Now, there should be certain checks and balances on all these tactical issues. And for those checks and balances, and to remove the agency theory and agency problem matters, we need to develop and discuss corporate governance. So there are certain governance issues which are also in direct association and relation with strategic choices. And the first governance issue we need to focus upon is the formation of board of directors. And no doubt we're talking about a corporate level orientation in which board of directors would comprise a group of individuals who are elected by the ownership of a corporation to have oversight and guidance over management and who look out for shareholders' interests. Now, there are certain responsibilities associated with board of directors, and those duties and responsibilities are listed on the slide. For example, the first issue can be the control and oversight over management. That is the duty and responsibility of the board, which would include select the chief executive officer, sanction the CEO's team, provide the CEO with a forum, ensure managerial competency, evaluate management's performance, set management salary levels including fringe benefits, guarantee managerial integrity through continuous auditing, chart the corporate course, devise and revise policies to be implemented by management. The second major area of duty and responsibility which the board has to take care of is adherence to legal prescriptions, which will include keep abreast of new laws, ensure the entire organization fulfills legal prescriptions, pass by laws and related resolutions, select new directors, approve capital budgets, and authorize borrowing, new stock issues, bonds, and so on. The third main area considered as the duty and responsibility for the board is consideration of stakeholders' interests, which would include monitor product quality, facilitate upward progression in employee quality of work life, review labor policies and practices, improve the customer climate, keep community regulations at the highest level, use influence to better governmental, professional, association, and educational contexts, and maintain good public image. I would strongly recommend that you should visit the website of Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and there you can find the manual of corporate governance. And in that manual, you can comfortably see that what are the policies and procedures prevalent in Pakistan and how SCCP is making sure that all the corporations should be following those governance laws. As per the theory, the fourth area as duty and responsibility for board of directors would talk about advancement of stockholder rights, and that would include preserve stockholders' equity. And obviously, we also need to focus upon saving the rights of the shareholders so that we would be able to maximize their wealth, and we should be avoiding the agency problem in which the principal is not given its due rights and the agent is driving the whole benefit. So when we talk about advancement of stockholders' rights, preserve stockholders' equity, stimulate corporate growth so that the firm will survive and flourish, guard against equity dilution, ensure equitable stockholders representation, inform stockholders through letters, reports, and meetings, declare proper dividends, and guarantee corporate survival. Now, there are certain principles of good governance. The first principle is no more than 2 directors are current or former company executives. The audit, compensation, and nominating committees are made up solely of outside directors. Each director owns a large equity stake in the company, excluding stock options. Each director attends at least 75% of all meetings. The board meets regularly without management present and evaluates its own performance annually. The CEO is not also the chairperson of the board. Stock options are considered a corporate expense, and there are no interlocking directorships where a director or CEO sits on another director's board. At the same time, even if there are so many rules, regulations, policies, duties, and responsibilities of the governance, there are still certain corporate wrongs. And the corporate wrongs would include loss of ethics, earnings become everything, ineffective boards, smart executives, huge wages for executive directors, greed leading to disparity among senior managers and other employees, short-term goals and considerations, collusion between directors and auditors, and in Pakistan, family control of companies. These are all the big issues of the corporate wrongs. Now, related to the governance issues, there is another very pressing issue these days, which is talking about corporate social responsibility as well. So let's talk about corporate social responsibility. CSR refers to the actions taken by businesses that further some social good beyond the interest of firm and that which is required by law. And that is the reason that we are discussing it in the strategic discussion. It is concerned with the impact of business behavior on society and can be regarded as a process of integrating business and society. There are certain CSR activities. The CSR activities include, number 1, incorporating social characteristics or features into products and manufacturing processes. Number 2, adopting progressive human resource management practices. Number 3, achieving higher levels of environmental performance through recycling and pollution abatement, and then advancing the goals of community organizations. I would strongly recommend that you should visit the websites of multinationals operating in Pakistan. For example, it can be the website of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, Unilever, and you can see on their homepage that they have mentioned their governance rules as well as the aspects related to the social responsibility. And being students, you must go through those articles and those documents so that you should know that how MNCs are following these factors. So the rationale for CSR, there are two arguments for CSR as presented by Hillman and Kelm in 2001, that there is a moral imperative for businesses to do the right things without regard to how much decisions affect firm performance. The social issues argument. And the firm can achieve competitive advantage by tying CSR activities to primary stakeholders, the stakeholders argument. So these are the two arguments which are in support of CSR. Now, developing a CSR strategy, it is said that identify the areas in which CSR activities might take place by reference to their relevance in the business context of the organization and an evaluation of their significance to stakeholders. Prioritize as necessary on the basis of an assessment of the relevance and significance of CSR to the organization and its stakeholders and the practicalities of introducing the activity or practice. The next important factor is that draw upon the strategy and make the case for it to top management and the stakeholders in order to obtain their approval. The second last point is developing a CSR strategy is communicate information on the strategy comprehensively and regularly and provide training to employees on the skills they need to use in implementing the CSR strategy. So that has basically concluded our discussion about the strategy selection and strategy formulation frameworks. And we have also talked about the role of board of directors and the governance issues. Along with that, we have discussed the corporate social responsibility, which is having strategic importance for us these days. So that basically concludes the chapter discussion as well. And we will be moving towards the next chapter, in which we'll be talking about the strategy implementation and the related issues.